In 2021, escapologist Jonathan Goodwin attempted one of the most dangerous stunts ever filmed for America's Got Talent Extreme, but it went catastrophically wrong. Suspended in a straitjacket between two swinging cars rigged to explode, the timing malfunctioned and the vehicles slammed together with him still in between before he plummeted more than 30 feet to the ground. The impact severed his spinal cord, shattered both legs and shoulder blades, destroyed a kidney, and left him permanently paralyzed. He was airlifted from the set in critical condition, underwent multiple surgeries, and spent months hospitalized before being discharged in early 2022. Now confined to a wheelchair for life, Goodwin has described the incident as a miracle of survival. The next year, Goodwin filed a lawsuit against NBC Universal and others, accusing them of negligence, inadequate safety protocols, and a production that valued spectacle over human life. The filing claims the stunt was rushed, chaotic, and staffed by a team that lacked the necessary expertise, and that Goodwin will be wheelchair-bound for the rest of his life because of it. The murder of 6-year-old beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey is one of the most baffling cases in American history, and the details are far darker than most people realize. On Christmas night in 1996, her parents found a bizarre 3-page ransom note demanding $118,000, the exact amount of her father's recent bonus, written on paper from inside their own home. Hours later, JonBenét's father reportedly discovered her body in the basement, strangled with a homemade garrote made from one of her mother's paintbrushes, her skull fractured, and her wrists loosely tied as if staged. There are also signs of possible sexual trauma, suggesting she may have been assaulted before or after death. Meanwhile, the autopsy revealed partially digested pineapple in her stomach, even though her parents claimed she went straight to bed that night. A bowl of pineapple with her brother Burke's fingerprints was later found on the kitchen table. There were no footprints in the snow outside, suggesting the killer never entered or left the house. Police later learned the basement window was already broken and the family never fixed it. The most popular theory today is that JonBenét was accidentally killed by her older brother Burke during a sudden outburst, possibly over the pineapple, and that their parents staged the ransom note and crime scene to protect him. This theory, while never proven, explains many of the inconsistencies in the evidence. But despite massive media attention, DNA tests, false confessions, and countless theories involving intruders, cover-ups, and family secrets, no one has ever been charged. Nearly 30 years later, the case still remains unsolved. In 1995, 6-year-old Elisa Izquierdo from Brooklyn became the face of one of the most horrifying child abuse cases in New York history. After years of living safely with relatives, Elisa was placed back in the care of her biological mother, Awilda Lopez, despite repeated warnings from family members and school officials about ongoing abuse and neglect. Almost immediately, neighbors and teachers noticed that Elisa had changed. She often arrived at school bruised, withdrawn, and terrified to go home. Over the next year, Awilda subjected her daughter to relentless cruelty. Elisa was often locked in a dark room for hours, forced to eat scraps or nothing at all, and denied basic care. Witnesses later recalled hearing her cry for help through the walls, while her mother screamed insults and accused her of being evil. She was beaten repeatedly, forced to sleep on the floor, and frequently sent to school with visible marks that no one acted on. In November of 1995, the abuse reached its breaking point. Awilda slammed Elisa's head into a concrete wall, inflicting a massive head injury that caused fatal brain damage, and by the time paramedics arrived, she couldn't be saved. Autopsy findings revealed injuries consistent with chronic physical and sexual abuse, including genital trauma and signs of repeated violation. Awilda was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. After serving over 2 decades, she was released in April of 2022, a decision that reignited outrage among those who still remember Elisa's case. Her case horrified New Yorkers not just because of its brutality, but because it was preventable. Teachers, neighbors, and relatives had all tried to report what was happening, yet every warning was ignored. In the aftermath, the city passed Elisa's law, aimed at preventing child welfare agencies from concealing such failures ever again. Her husband's disgusting secret drove her insane, and what she did next was pure horror. In 2020, 59-year-old Corinna Smith from Cheshire, England, learned that her husband Michael Baines had allegedly been sexually abusing their children for years. Enraged and unable to sleep, she boiled a pot of water, stirred in 3 bags of sugar to make it thicker and stickier, then poured the scalding mixture over him as he lay in bed. The sugar turned the water into a syrup that clung to his skin, causing burns so deep they exposed his flesh. Baines screamed in agony and survived for 5 excruciating weeks before succumbing to his injuries. Smith later told police she simply lost control after finding out what he'd done. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 12 years. In 1985, talk show host Richard Belzer invited Hulk Hogan and Mr. T on his show to promote the first ever WrestleMania. To demonstrate a wrestling hold, Hogan placed Belzer in a front chinlock that instantly cut off blood flow. Belzer passed out within seconds, went limp, and collapsed headfirst onto the studio floor, splitting his head open on live television. He regained consciousness with blood pooling on the stage and later needed stitches.
See? It works. All right, brother.
And now, we'll be right back after this word from you-know-who. We'll be right back.
Belzer later sued Hogan and the WWF for $5 million but settled out of court, reportedly using the payout to buy a house he jokingly called Ches Hogan. In 1945, 12-year-old Paul Cusack was reported missing after going out to play near his home in Euclid, Ohio. The next morning, his father began searching nearby lots and made a horrific discovery in a storage yard used by a grain company. Paul had been accidentally buried alive beneath an avalanche of thousands of pounds of split peas after heavy sacks of them toppled over and collapsed on top of him while he was playing nearby. Brendan Fraser's brief collapse was driven by years of physical destruction, psychological breakdown, and what many believe was a Hollywood blacklist. At the height of his career, he was performing nearly all of his own stunts, which led to multiple herniated discs, spinal compression, a fractured pelvis, and repeated surgeries that left him in constant pain. In 1999, Fraser nearly died during the filming of The Mummy when a hanging stunt went horribly wrong and the rope was pulled too tightly, cutting off blood flow to his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. He later said doctors told him he came dangerously close to serious brain injury or death. Around the same time, he endured the passing of his mother, a financially devastating divorce, and severe depression. Brendan later alleged he was sexually assaulted by a powerful Hollywood executive in 2003, and after speaking about it privately, his career abruptly stalled. Many believe he was quietly blacklisted as major roles vanished almost overnight, leaving him to describe himself as invisible for years while living in pain and isolation. After roughly a 15-year hiatus, Fraser ultimately rebuilt his life and career, returning to Hollywood on his own terms and finding renewed stability and appreciation from fans. Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman from Slaughter, Louisiana, who was found dead in January of 2022 after years of being left to rot on a couch in her parents' home. She suffered from severe autism and was reportedly nonverbal. When authorities arrived, Lacey's body was fused to the sofa, surrounded by years of human waste, insects, and mold. She only weighed about 96 pounds, had bed sores that exposed bone, and was covered in feces and maggots. Coroners ruled her death a homicide caused by severe neglect, starvation, and untreated medical conditions. Investigators determined she had likely been left in the same position for at least 12 years, slowly melting into the sofa while her parents lived in the house with her. Despite the horrific condition of her body and the prolonged suffering, her parents were initially charged with second-degree murder, but the charges were later reduced and ultimately dismissed by a judge in 2024, since the judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't prove that Lacey's parents intended to kill her or knowingly caused her death, triggering widespread public outrage over how such prolonged extreme neglect could result in no prison sentence. In one of the most evil cases of betrayal ever recorded, a man from New Zealand secretly infected his wife with HIV using a sewing needle dipped in his own blood. After cheating on her and being diagnosed himself, he feared she would leave him. So while she slept, he pricked her leg, leaving only a tiny sting and a red mark. Months later, during a routine checkup, she tested positive for the virus and confronted him. He chillingly confessed, saying he only did it so she would be the same as me and would never leave. Prosecutors later called it an act of pure cruelty, and the man was sentenced to prison for willfully injecting another with a disease, a charge so rare that even the judge called it almost without precedent. Here's a photo of a 71-year-old man in profound distress outside a burning residential complex in Hong Kong on November 26, 2025, after telling reporters his wife was trapped inside as smoke and flames engulfed the high-rise towers. The blaze began in the afternoon at a nearby housing estate and quickly spread through bamboo scaffolding and flammable renovation materials, consuming 7 of the 8 apartment blocks and sending dark plumes of smoke into the sky. Authorities later confirmed the fire became one of the deadliest residential blazes in Hong Kong history, with the final official death toll reaching 168 people, including a firefighter. In 2003, at the Toledo Hospital in Ohio, a man named Paul Fudach Jr. donated one of his kidneys to save the life of his sister, Sarah. Surgeons successfully removed the healthy organ and placed it in a sterile container as they prepared for the transplant. But while it sat unattended outside the operating room, a nurse found the container, did not realize it held a donated human kidney, and mistakenly threw the $250,000 organ into a medical waste bin. By the time the error was discovered, the kidney had been contaminated and had to be destroyed. Paul had undergone undergone major surgery for nothing, and Sarah lost her chance at a life-saving transplant. She did finally receive a donor kidney months later as the hospital admitted fault, paid a settlement, and rewrote the organ handling procedures after the incident. This was the moment an Indonesian conservationist broke down in tears after finally witnessing one of the rarest flowers on Earth bloom. After searching the rainforests of Sumatra for 13 years, Diki Andriki and his team found a Rafflesia, a parasitic flower often nicknamed a corpse flower because it releases a powerful odor of rotting flesh to attract insects. The plant spends most of its life hidden inside a host vine and only blooms for a few days, making sightings incredibly rare as researchers never even see one in their lifetime. When the massive, foul-smelling flower began to open in front of him, the weight of more than a decade of dangerous jungle expeditions and failed searches finally hit. This is one of the rarest atmospheric events ever caught on video. Upward lightning erupting from the summit of Volcán de Agua in Guatemala. The bolts appear to tear straight out of the volcano, making it look less like weather and more like something unnatural unfolding in real time. Unlike normal lightning that strikes downward from clouds, this phenomenon shoots upward from the ground into the storm above, triggered by intense electrical imbalance. It's so uncommon that storm chasers never even see it once in their lifetime, and it's almost never captured this clearly over a populated city. In one of the most disturbing cases ever shown on My Strange Addiction, a Tennessee woman named Casey developed a heartbreaking obsession after her husband Sean died suddenly from an asthma attack. Stricken with grief, she began carrying his urn everywhere, talking to it, sleeping beside it, and treating it like her husband was still alive. One day, when some of the ashes accidentally spilled on her hand, she instinctively licked them off, and soon enough became addicted to doing it deliberately. She admitted to eating the ashes up to 5 times per day, worried that if she ever stopped, she'd truly lose him forever. The ashes reportedly tasted like sand and rotten eggs, but she couldn't resist the rare feeling of closeness it gave her. Over time, she eventually consumed nearly a pound of her husband's remains, until appearing on the show finally made her realize how far her grief had gone. After filming, Casey entered therapy and eventually stopped consuming the ashes, keeping his urn nearby as a reminder of love rather than loss. This was the moment a mermaid performer was attacked by a Chinese sturgeon during a live aquarium show. The performer, Maria Zelenina, was swimming inside a tank at Xishuangbanna Primitive Forest Park when the massive fish lunged forward without warning and pulled her head into its jaws as spectators watched in horror. She fought free underwater and surfaced in visible distress with her goggles ripped off, suffering from facial bruising, swelling around her eye, and lingering pain that affected her vision, later requiring medical treatment. While there are no confirmed cases of a sturgeon killing a human, the species can grow over 10 feet long, weighs hundreds of pounds, and has powerful jaws capable of crushing bone, meaning a sustained bite or loss of air underwater could easily be fatal. Here's a clip showing the importance of being aware of your surroundings at all times. In the video, a family is unloading their car in what many commenters believe to be a South American country like Argentina. Before going inside, the woman immediately senses something is wrong when a car pulls up directly in front of her. Without hesitation, she runs inside and locks the door just seconds before the men can reach the house. With no access to the home, the men quickly grab items from the family's car, get back in their vehicle, and speed off. In 2022, in Rockdale, England, police were searching for 18-year-old Joshua Dobson, who was wanted for stealing a car, driving while disqualified, and failing to pay for fuel. When police arrived at his home to arrest him, they found no sign of him, but they noticed a giant teddy bear sitting in the room that appeared to be subtly moving as if it were breathing. Suspicious, police approached the stuffed animal and discovered Dobson hiding inside of it, having cut it open and climbed inside in an attempt to evade capture. He was immediately arrested at the scene and later sentenced to 9 months in prison for the offenses. In 2023, 44-year-old Shikundi Tati of Maryland was arrested after police say he disguised himself as a woman to gain access to women's locker rooms at various gyms across the region. Investigators allege he secretly recorded women while they showered, using the disguise to avoid suspicion. The case came to light after gym members reported consistent suspicious behavior, leading to an investigation that uncovered the hidden recordings and led to his arrest. In November of 2023, 56-year-old Bart Ryder went in for a routine cataract surgery in Colorado and died because no one realized he stopped breathing. A lawsuit later revealed that the surgeon and anesthesiologist were playing a music bingo game during the procedure, and although Ryder was hooked up to monitors, the audible alarms weren't turned on. He soon turned blue under the sheet while staff focused on the playlist instead of his vitals. By the time they realized his oxygen had crashed about 11 minutes in, he'd already suffered fatal cardiac arrest. Both doctors accusers admitted under oath that they were playing the game, and the case was settled outside of court. This photo was taken at 10:28 a.m. on 9/11 by photographer Bill Bigart, just seconds before the North Tower collapsed and killed him. Bigart had rushed toward the burning towers while most people were running away, documenting the chaos from the streets below. When crews later found his body in the rubble, they also recovered his cameras and memory cards, which held the final 150 photos of his life, including this one, time-stamped less than 10 seconds before the collapse buried him where he stood. So if you haven't been following, 15-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez went missing in August of 2025, and after several weeks with no sightings, her body was discovered on September 8th inside the front trunk of an abandoned Tesla registered to musician David in the Hollywood Hills. She was wrapped in plastic, dismembered, severely decomposed, and the medical examiner couldn't immediately determine how she died or how long she'd been dead. Now the newest details reveal that her remains had actually been frozen before being placed in the car, and that's a major problem for investigators. Freezing and thawing a body destroys bruising, masks injuries, washes away blood patterns, and can literally erase the signs that tell examiners whether someone was beaten, stabbed, strangled, or died another way. After the body was frozen, it then sat in the Tesla for 2 to 4 weeks, thawing and decomposing while wiping out whatever forensic clues were left. David hasn't cooperated and remains a suspect but still hasn't been arrested yet because the autopsy is incomplete and prosecutors can't file major charges until the cause of death is confirmed. The freezing detail is why investigators are now struggling to determine when she died, what was done to her, and who handled her body in the weeks she was missing. David's upcoming tour dates, album promo, and public appearances have all been canceled as the case remains under investigation. In 2020, Megan Thee Stallion survived an attack that left her bleeding in the street, shot in both of her feet as she tried to walk away from a late-night argument. Bullet fragments tore into the back of her left heel and scattered through the soles of both feet. Injuries so deep that surgeons couldn't remove all the shrapnel, and pieces are still lodged inside her body. The man she identified as the shooter was later convicted and sentenced, but Megan has said the worst part wasn't the pain. It was being viciously mocked online by people who insisted she was lying, exaggerating, or milking the incident while she was recovering from gunshot wounds. In 1910 Los Angeles, a woman named Miss Bell had been searching for her missing Scotch Terrier for weeks when her friend G.E. Seawright stumbled upon the answer by pure nightmare coincidence. The man was having a hot dog for lunch when he suddenly bit down on something hard, a small metal object hidden deep inside his meal. When he fished it out and wiped it clean, he immediately froze. Stamped on the metal was the identification number of Miss Bell's missing dog. Only then did he realize the horrific truth. The dog had somehow been cooked into the meat of a local hot dog stand. Donald Glover has revealed that he secretly suffered a stroke while on tour in 2024, collapsing with severe head pain and blurred vision before doctors in Houston told him what had happened. Medical scans then uncovered something even more horrifying, a hidden hole in his heart that required multiple surgeries, while he was also dealing with a broken foot and crushing exhaustion. The combination led to a cascade of health failures that didn't just threaten his tour, they nearly killed him. After months of treatment and recovery, Glover says he's stable now and finally healthy again. In 2002, 21-year-old Angela Walker and her brother attacked 32-year-old Canadian tourist Derek Rogers on a beach in Maine, reportedly knocking him unconscious and stuffing sand into his airways until he suffocated. Walker later lied to police about what had happened, before pleading guilty to manslaughter and perjury and receiving 10 years in prison. More than 2 decades later, in 2025, she was elected to the Bangor City Council, an outcome that drew outrage from the Rogers family and revived public attention towards the brutal killing. A 29-year-old Florida woman managed to impersonate a registered nurse for months, slipping into a hospital job while using someone else's license number. During that time, she treated more than 4,000 patients, taking vitals, administering medications, and performing procedures she wasn't trained for. Staff only uncovered the truth when she was offered a promotion and her credentials didn't add up. Investigators later learned she'd been working on the floor for far longer than anyone realized, blending in so well that no one questioned her until she tried to move up. She now faces multiple felony charges, while thousands of patients are being notified that the person who cared for them wasn't a nurse at all. At Disney Springs, a bizarre robbery unfolded straight out of a heist movie in September of 2025. A man in full scuba gear swam up to the Paddlefish restaurant after midnight, snuck inside, and forced 2 employees to the ground as they were counting cash. He stole over $10,000, then slipped back into the water and vanished beneath the surface, escaping the same way he arrived. When police got there, all they found were wet footprints, discarded dive gear, and 2 shaken employees tied up inside. To this day, the aquatic thief hasn't been identified. These men were just arrested for planning something absolutely horrific. Gavin Weisenberg and Tanner Thomas of North Texas were arrested after federal investigators uncovered their deranged plan to sail to a Haitian island, massacre every man living there, and turn the women and children into sex slaves. Court documents say they weren't just fantasizing. They were buying a sailboat, gathering weapons, recruiting homeless people as soldiers, and even running crude training drills in rural Texas where they practiced ambushes and mock executions. Prosecutors say they mapped out the island on Google Earth, drafted a post-conquest government, and talked openly about executing the men, breeding the women, and raising enslaved children, all while one of them was coercing a minor into creating explicit material. The FBI foiled the plot before they could leave Texas, but the indictment describes a plan so violent and delusional, it reads like a real-life blueprint for a modern-day genocide. They now face up to life in federal prison if convicted of the conspiracy charge, and up to 30 years for the charges relating to CP. Here's a photo of what can happen when a hair dye allergy goes catastrophically wrong. This young woman suffered a violent reaction to PPD, a chemical found in most at-home dye kits, and within hours her forehead began swelling so fast it nearly doubled in size. The reaction triggered angioedema, a dangerous buildup of fluid that pooled around her eyes and scalp, warping the shape of her head and leaving one eye almost swollen shut. Doctors warn that reactions like this can escalate to throat swelling and suffocation if left untreated, and that once your body reacts to PPD, even a tiny exposure in the future can set off something even worse. In Hangzhou, China, visitors can find two iron statues permanently forced to kneel, Qin Hui and his wife Wang. They were the officials blamed for framing and executing the national hero Yu Fei in 1142. For nearly 900 years, visitors have treated the figures as if they were still alive and deserving punishment, spitting on them and smacking their heads in a ritual of public contempt. The hatred ran so deep that locals had to keep rebuilding the statues multiple times because people kept destroying them, turning these kneeling effigies into one of the longest-running acts of symbolic vengeance in history.